So today I'm so thrilled to introduce to all of you two people who are dedicated to building civility across political viewpoints and to building understanding about the importance of language in a strong democracy and the importance that language has in contributing to that kind of a thoughtful dialogue. I want to introduce you first to Kristen Cambell, who's on your right. Kristen is the Executive Director of the Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement. Its mission is to inspire interest, understanding, and investment in civic engagement within philanthropy and to be a voice for philanthropy in larger conversations in the fields of civic engagement, service, and democratic practice. Previously, she was an independent consultant, focusing primarily on education, leadership, and civic engagement. She was the Chief Program Officer of the National Conference on Citizenship, and prior to that, a member of the Social Investment Team at the Case Foundation. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you with us. To Kristen's right is Dr. Carolyn Lukensmeyer, who's the Executive Director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse, an organization that works to reduce political dysfunction and incivility in our political system. As a leader in the field of deliberative democracy, she works to restore our democracy to reflect the intended vision of our founding fathers. She previously served as founder and president of America Speaks, an award-winning nonprofit organization that promoted nonpartisan initiatives to engage citizens and leaders throughout the development of innovative public policy tools and strategies. So, Carolyn, thank you so much for being with us. Our format is as follows. So we've asked them to each give some words and opening remarks. Then we'll have a conversation, and finally we'll open it up to all of you. For the Q&A portion of this session, we're asking that you write your questions on a piece of paper. You have your yellow pads. And when you have written one, and you may do so throughout the session, please just hold it up, and one of our organizers will come and get it from you. And I'll be able to present those questions to the speakers. So, welcome. And okay, Carolyn, please take it away.
Well, it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be here. The JCRC, I understand, had done 3 years on civility before this meeting. You can't quit now. I wanted to make just 2 points in the few minutes that we each have to speak to you directly. I want to talk to you a little bit of data about how the American people feel about the current state of our public and political discourse, and then a couple minutes on how is this time different than previous times in American history. So there are 2 surveys, both of which the full data is up on the web for some of you who would like to look in more detail. Weber Shandrick, which is the second largest PR and media firm in the world, the CEO 8 years ago started to do a Civility in America survey. And I would say he was definitely a little prescient in terms of understanding the importance of this issue. In the most recent of those surveys, which was released in March of 2018, and again, they have a terrific report up on their website, 75% of us now believe and feel that incivility in our political and our public discourse is a crisis. Those of you who work with Poll Day on a regular basis know that anytime a pollster gets a number above 60%, they're willing to take to the bank. They're willing to say, this is a phenomenon that is now impacting all Americans. 83% of us in that same survey said that they believe that the incivility in our public and political discourse is now a threat to the freedom of expression. We're on a university campus. That's the first place this has broken down in our society in terms of very serious issues. Who gets invited to speak on the campus? How do people behave when the speaker is there? So incivility is now even pushing us to a First Right Amendment, the freedom of speech. The last stat I'll give you is that 87% of us believe that the current state of how we talk to each other in our politics and now in our public squares is actually losing its stature around the world. Second survey I want to share. About 8 months ago, an executive vice president of the American Psychological Association approached the National Institute for Civil Discourse and said, we would really like partnership with you folks because we are hearing from our members that incivility or the current political climate is a major source of stress amongst Americans. Now, when the APA does their stress survey, which they've done every year for more than 20 years, they define stress very, very specifically. Are you sleeping less well? Are you less productive at work? Have you lost a relationship over a conflict about political climate in our country? They've never seen this before. Every year they publish the top 10 causes of stress. This year, or for 2017, the current political climate was chosen by 57% of us as the primary cause of stress in their lives. Now this fits very closely with our own experience at the National Institute for Civil Discourse. Beginning early in the Republican primary in 2016, we began to get thousands of messages from people all over this country, red states, blue states, purple states. I'll never forget a call from a mother in New England around Thanksgiving of that year. We are really shaken about dinner at our home for Thanksgiving. We have 2 daughters. They're both in Ivy League schools in the East Coast. One supports Hillary, one supports Trump. Do you have any ideas for us to help us have a Thanksgiving dinner that isn't contentious, that isn't negative? That led us to create a whole initiative called Setting the Table for Civility, which we will do again this Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, etc. We got calls from pastors, from rabbis, even a few moms saying, I've been the pastor of this Lutheran church in Cleveland Heights, Ohio for 30 years. Our congregation does everything together. But since the election, it's like we're divided camps. We don't have a community anymore. Biggest surprise to me, we got calls from major corporations saying that since the 2016 election, and we've gotten still calls like this year, 2 years later, we have product innovation teams that have not come back to the same level of productivity post-election that they were at prior to the election. This is their bottom line 5 years, 10 years from now. So every arena in which we live our lives are now impacted by this incivility. It literally is like a virus. And we're at that place where if we don't do something about this between us, the American people, yes, we do have to do the accountability, yes, we have to deal with it in terms of our elections, etc. But this now is to the level that frankly, as we go through next elections, this phenomena, it doesn't matter who's going to be elected next. Of course it does on every other level. But in terms of the way we now have demonized one another, really hated one another for our political choices, that's not going to go away anytime soon. I don't know where I am with my 5 minutes, but can I say one? Okay. So how is this time different than ever before? And all of us in this audience, as soon as I say it, will know what I'm talking about. We had an election as recently as 2000 that turned out just like this one, the last one. The popular vote went one way, the electoral college vote went the other way. But in 2000, you did not have millions of Americans demonizing, otherizing people who voted for George W. Bush. Yes, I'm sure there were millions of Democrats in the country, maybe some in this room, who never gave George W. Bush a chance. But we didn't shift our animus to the people who voted for him. That's now where we are. Depending on what state I'm in, depending on what group of people I'm talking to, I hear thousands of Trump voters say, I'm afraid to say I voted for Trump because I'm going to be labeled a racist or a bigot. Vice versa. So you know the story that we're at. This is now between us as we the people, and we have to deal with it on that level, as well as the other levels we've been talking about today.
Carolyn. Before I share a little bit about why I'm interested in this conversation, I want to add something to what you just laid out, particularly in that idea of we the people, right? It's of, by, and for. And so really this question of how we, the people, show up in these conversations and in these dynamics is really important. I'm not as data-oriented quite as you are, but I do recall there being, I believe it was a Washington Post survey, so slightly different than the one that you cited, that came out a few years ago that found similar numbers of, 75 to 80% of people saying that they really felt that incivility and the inability to cooperate across difference was a major problem. But when they followed up and said, would you be willing to support your politician in compromising around the issue, somewhere between 53 and 60% of people said no. So it was something that they wanted everyone else to do, but they weren't necessarily willing to change their behavior around it. And so I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine the constituents that our political leaders are hearing from, particularly when it comes to these very contentious issues, are not ones that are calling to say, please, sir or madam, can you be a little kinder and work together a little bit more. And so that also then, again, turns back to we the people to say this is both a supply side issue and a demand side issue for how we deal with this. So I just want to add that onto what Carolyn was sharing. A quick note about PACE. We are a membership network of foundations and funders that invest in civic engagement and democratic practice, which we define very broadly in any number of ways, and our membership is very inherently diverse. But we all share a belief that America will be healthier, more productive, more resilient, and more successful if democracy is strong and if the office of citizen is treated as central to how our democracy functions. And so our interest in this question started back in early 2017 when we really wanted to understand, we had a lot of members that were supporting kind of broadly defined bridge building or deliberative democracy efforts. And we wanted to understand what makes people willing to engage in those conversations. How might philanthropy help engender better conditions for those tough discussions to take place? What makes them successful and what makes them fail? And what might be different in our communities if we could bring this type of relationship building and this type of dialogue to more people in more ways? And so we launched a question. It was a pretty straightforward question of how can philanthropy create the spaces for people to come together around very complex and very divisive issues. And we launched research, we went out and talked to people, we've been doing lots of interviews, and I'll share some of the themes, the early emerging themes over the course of our conversation today. But one thing that we really quickly learned, a few things that we really quickly learned, one is that's not as straightforward as a question as we hoped that it might be. It's even more multi-layered than we anticipated. We knew it wouldn't be an easy question. But when you start to bring in things like social identity theory, a lot of the statistics that Carolyn mentioned, it becomes a very complicated question very quickly. And the environment in which we were asking the question has become more complex and more complicated as well. But one of the things that really quickly came to the forefront for us is really how much this issue of language and the words and phrases and terminology that we use to describe this work, whether it's democracy or civic engagement or bridge building, however we frame it, how important that language is. And so I think for a lot of us that have done this work, we know that the language that we use has always been a little bit of a challenge because it can be very dry and academic. Terms like deliberative democracy don't really resonate emotionally with a lot of Americans. They're not the words that they use to describe what it means to them to show up in their communities. But one of the things that we've uncovered, and it's not really a surprise because we've uncovered it in many sectors and many issues in a lot of ways, is that the language is becoming increasingly loaded. So even terms like democracy or power or citizenship or even liberty and justice are more complicated, not only based on how we interpret what those words mean and how they show up in our lives, but how we internalize what we think they mean based on who says them to us, which kind of goes to this like affective polarization idea that I think we'll get into. And so we really believe that if democracy is one of the few things in our country that arguably can and is and should be for everyone, if we can't talk about democracy because the words are such a barrier, that's a problem. And so we've recently just started an inquiry to try to understand a little bit more about these perceptions of language, because we've just really come to understand how intertwined the idea of civility is from the idea of the language that we use. And so I tend to believe that we probably do have more in common than what divides us, but if we can't even get to the place that we're having the conversations about common ground because the words are a barrier, then that's a problem. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that, especially right now, the thrivingness of our democracy depends on our ability to kind of get under the surface of a lot of these issues. And so that's what animates our interest in this discussion, and I think probably for Carolyn as well.
More about where your work connects and where some of the work that you're each doing, where you may have different perspectives. And I want to go back, Carolyn, to something you said about a real shift that you've noticed since President George W. Bush was in office, and relative to today, the lack of personal demonization that you now see. So was that when you started to see a shift? Was that when we started to see the real polarization and the divide begin to happen? And what, upon reflection now, when you look back at that moment where things shifted, what were some of the hallmarks that enabled the shift?
So earlier speakers brought this up, but the fact that Donald Trump was able to be elected President of the United States came about from changes in our democratic institutions and processes over several decades. So he was not a cause at that stage. He was a symptom of the things you heard from earlier panelists: too much money in politics, gerrymandering, 24/7 news cycle. However, during the 2016 campaign and since then, Donald Trump has shifted from symptom to cause, particularly on this issue of the use of language and otherizing complete groups. I mean, just go back to the primary process. We attack Muslims, we attack women, we attack disabled people. So the shift in terms of when this began to really seep into the culture really is pretty short term in terms of this language. Not the hyperpartisanship and dysfunction in terms of how Congress was operating, but look, human beings are social beings. We all want to be connected, and we respond to the modeling we see. I'm going to tell two stories that I think really get at the heart of what you asked, Abby. When Donald Trump first attacked Muslims during the campaign, you may remember, he literally in that first round called every person who believes the Muslim faith a terrorist. And he then went to say, and if I'm elected president, they won't be here anymore. I live in Washington, D.C. Fairfax County, which is just across the river, has had one of the best public school systems in all the rankings we would care about, from kindergarten through 12th grade, for decades. And it is an extremely diverse student population. 1 week after Donald Trump made that first attack on Muslims, this came from parent monitors on the playground. Little third grade white boys were heard taunting little third grade brown boys and girls. If Donald Trump elected, you won't be here anymore. And those brown boys and girls were actually Hispanic, which is kind of a side point. But my reason for sharing this is we follow modeling. And what Donald Trump has now been modeling as a person for more than 2 years is that it is legitimate to use bigoted language. It is legitimate to otherize whole populations. If I could I wouldn't have thought of sharing this except for what Alex Padillo shared when his very very lovely talk. This business about we are social beings. Put us in situation A and we behave this way. Put the same person in situation B and they often behave that way. The most profound example in our shared political public history is the Charlottesville event in August of 2017. I don't know, how many of you have been to Richmond, Virginia, and have gone down Monument Mile? Richmond, Virginia has more Confederate monuments in that mile than most cities put together. 2.5 years ago, the leaders of Richmond, Virginia, not just political leaders, but educational leaders, business leaders, they came together, they watched what had happened in some other cities and said, you know, we're going to have a serious problem here when the monument issue comes up. And they actually started doing community meetings. They first tried it in the whole community. It was a little difficult, so they decided to go back to neighborhoods. For 2.5 years, they held listening sessions. What should we be doing about our Confederate monuments? This is all up on their website. If you read what people said, someone was informed, someone was misinformed. But the bottom line is, this last May, they gave this to a commission and they have a set of recommendations. 60 miles down the road, Charlottesville, the community has done no preparation. There was no structure. There was no safety net for the community conversations. There had actually been issues between the university and the city that had been publicized. This is a very dramatic example. White nationalists didn't by accident pick Charlottesville as the place to take their rally, as opposed to they could have picked Richmond. So if we create the structures and we create the processes in which people can share their most deeply held beliefs, whether they're factual or not, we can modify this behavior and keep it in the norms of civility and respect. But if we don't, then in the current climate we're in, the legitimacy is on the side of disrespect and incivility.
Just before I hand over to Kristen, I just want to ask, I have paid very close attention to the presidential campaign and all that has happened since, and I actually don't remember President Trump making that kind of broad, sweeping castigation of all Muslims and saying that, I remember plenty of Islamophobic stuff. I don't remember his campaign promise to get rid of all Muslims. Do you happen to recall when that was?
I can look it up and give you the detail, but it was during the primary. It was during the Republican primary, before it should just be held.
So weigh in here on this. So one of the things, I guess picking up on the idea of being social beings and how much like behavioral and cognitive science is behind this a lot too. One of the things that I think we're having more and more of a conversation about anymore is this idea of affective polarization, which is not, there's a whole bunch of theory behind it that I would not do justice to, but the basic precept of it is that we don't feel as strongly about what we believe as we do as how strongly we believe that the other person is wrong. And so there's some data from, I believe it's Pew, that shows, and it's almost exact numbers, it's 68% on one side and 69% on the other side, but something like 68% of Democrats don't even feel that strongly about the Democratic platform as they feel that the Republican platform is wrong, and vice versa. Republicans don't necessarily feel as strongly about the Republican platform being right as they do about the Democratic platform being wrong. And what that has manifested into is this idea that 4 in 10 people have said that it's not, that the other side is so dangerous that it threatens the vitality of America. And that's not even saying that what they believe is so right, that it's the best thing for America, it's what they believe is so wrong that it threatens the very health and vitality of America. And I think that in some ways that's a relatively new phenomenon. But one of the things that we have been thinking about too, and it kind of goes to this modeling point, is in a lot of ways, for better or worse, intentionally or not, a lot of the language in our political sphere is language of violence, and it's language of fighting, right? Like, listen to how people talk about things. It's, I will not go down without a fight. This is a war on our values. We're in a battle for our lives. And it's, for better or worse, that's it. And maybe sometimes that's that's true. We can have policy debates about that. But what it does is it sets up this idea of defensiveness, right? Like there's an inherent win and lose dynamic in a fight. And if most people's first orientation into civic life is through politics, and politics permeates so many other aspects of our civic life or our public square, whether or not they're political, it's not entirely surprising then that we're seeing this kind of carry over. And so we end up in these binaries, right, where we say, well, for you to win means I have to lose, and nobody wants to lose, right? And so when we frame things in these kind of binary ways with these win-lose language, we limit the imagination about what's possible and what investments in the processes of bringing people together to talk about their experiences and their ideas, that becomes inherently limiting, and it becomes even harder to do, and it makes just kind of an antagonistic approach to things. So if democracy is nuanced and complex and faces any spectrum of challenges, if our conversations are limited in that way, we can have a little bit of a crisis of imagination about that. And so, to be fair, sometimes maybe that fighting language is necessary, and maybe there are trade-offs of win-lose that we do need to, have thoughtful and informed debates about. But we need to do a better job of understanding when that's hyperbolic and when it's actually being used to pit us against each other for political gain, versus when we might actually need to have some tough decisions about some trade-offs. Because when we just have that win-lose orientation, it very infrequently leads to a place where we can have mutual understanding and respect for each other.
Kristen, you talked about the importance of being judicious in determining when we will be morally outraged. Tell us a little bit about the how. Is it possible to be morally outraged and to express that, but in a civil way? And does it work?
Yeah.
What does the data tell us about whether it works?
It's such a good question. I don't exactly know what the data tells us empirically about what works and what doesn't. But one thing that we have found some success in is leading with questions instead of presuming answers, or kind of saying, how do we get this policy when passed? But really leading with a question of what's the best way to ensure this idea of shared values. So it doesn't automatically put people on the defensive or on a side. One example of this that I love is we do a lot of work with the Kettering Foundation. And they do a lot of kind of community town hall, community discussions, and they have one on safety and justice. And what are the inherent trade-offs between safety and justice? And they wanted to have one of these town halls around police-community relations, which is obviously one of the most tense conversations that a lot of us can have right now, right? And there's very principled and deeply held views on all sides of that debate. So they decided to lead with the question, but the question wasn't, how do we improve police and community relations? Because while that is a very accurate and direct and probably not inherently triggering question, it could put people in the position of saying, well, this is my team. I'm coming in on this side of this debate. So instead of asking the question, how do we improve police and community relations, they asked the question, how do we help everyone come home safely? And it is an inherently disarming question. It allows people to start from a place of good faith and a place of common ground. And frankly, as the moderator of the conversation, it sets you up to say, if you disagree with the premise of this question, then we probably have another issue that civil discourse is not going to be the avenue to solve.
So I want to give a bit of context before I respond to your exact question about moral outrage and protest and civility. I realize I don't think we said here, and many of you may not know, that this institute was created after the mass shooting in Tucson, Arizona, in which 6 people died, including a 10-year-old girl who came to your congresswoman on the corner because she wanted to run for elected office sometime, and 13 people were wounded, including Abby Porth. The community and the university came together 10 days after the memorial to create this institute to say something good has to come out of this tragic event. When I assumed the leadership, which was in July of 2016, it didn't matter what audience I was in front of. People always challenged, well, what is civility anyway? Aren't you just telling people they have to be nice to each other? And what has that got to do with all these tough issues that we're working with? And as I was grappling with how to respect that question, but in fact connect with the people asking it in a more significant way, it occurred to me to look up the etiology of the word civility. And I was very surprised, and I think many of you may be as well. In Western culture, civility has become equated with manners. That is the sense you have about that word. But the word civility actually comes from the 1300s in the French language. And it literally translated as duties or responsibilities of a citizen. That's quite a different understanding of civility. The reason I think it has applicability to exactly what you asked, the next big change at my desk at the Institute began to happen really at the time of the choice about separating children at the border and all the images people saw of children in cages. And again, I'm not commenting on the policy at all. I'm commenting on America's reaction to the policy. That just was heated up after the Kavanaugh hearings. And now you are reading where, in fact, Democratic leaders are saying we can't treat Republicans as civil any longer because you know where I'm going, which is we're now in a place where the mantra coming from a lot of directions is incivility is passé. Civility is passé. We're at a time when we have to fight at the level that Kristen was talking about. Well, stop and think for a minute. In American history, all of American history, the foundational values of civility and respect, which literally were actually talked about at the Constitutional Convention, actually have grown up at the same time frame, right alongside profound protest movements that eventually led to a revolution. So I think it's a paradox. We feel like you can't both hold the values of civility and respect and at the same time hold out the right to protest when you are morally outraged. I think Martin Luther King is the best example of a human being who held both of those values simultaneously. And yes, some very, very violent things happened during the Civil Rights Movement. But if you follow his pattern, his language, his behavior, yes, he advocated for things like a boycott. Yes, he advocated, but you never, ever saw Martin Luther King himself behave in that incivility protest moment. It requires us to all come from our absolute best selves, or as Lincoln would have said, better angels. But I don't think there is a versus between the democratic value of civility and respect and the democratic freedom to protest. And I think we're living in a time when each of us, based on our sense of morality, makes a choice in which activity we do when. Hopefully we can continue on the protest side as civilly as possible as we move through these various tough times.
Can I pick up on something? Can I pick up on something from that? Because one of the things that reminds me of is when we've kind of led with the question of how do we create these better spaces and how do we have more civil conversations around them, one of the responses that we get is like, what's just below that question? Though, like, what's right underneath that? Why is it incivil in the first place? And what deeply held values or identities are we asking people to forsake in service of civility? Is civility the end goal, or are these other things the end goal? And And so I just want to appreciate, Carolyn, how you raised that, because I think it really does raise the idea of, like, why does incivility exist? Is it injustice, oppression, exclusion, fear, loss? Kind of all of these things that we need to unpack and understand in order to even be able to have the civil conversation about what the solution is and how we can all play a role in that.
You know, we're getting a huge, fabulous stack of questions from all of you, and I see that one of the recurring themes in the questions is related to social media, the role that social media plays in either inhibiting civility in our society, or if well utilized, perhaps contributing positively to building democracy and building deliberation. I wonder if you would each comment on that. And I'd like to ask you specific, because our audience seems to really believe that social media is really a disaster for civility. Let's go to what are some models that maybe you have seen here or globally for how it can harness the power for democracy?
I often like to use Charles Dickens' famous opening to A Tale of Two Cities about social media. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. There's no question but the existence of social media democratized the voice for millions of people worldwide. Arab Spring probably being one of the most dramatic examples, although tragically there wasn't enough civil society institutions to hold the next steps of that revolution. But frankly, as you heard from both media people and certainly as we hear from all the school systems we work in, the negative side of social media at this point is much more dominant in people's lives than the positive part. I think the next step, and I know all the reasons, as you know all the reasons why what I'm about to say would not be easy, but we need to do the same thing with social media that we've done with every other form of mass communications. We need to develop a set of standards of conduct. We did it in print, we did it in radio, we did it in television, we've done it in entertainment, and no, those aren't perfect. There are still outliers in all of those mediums, but we haven't even stepped close to trying to do it in social media. At the Institute, this is not really the core of our work, and I do at some point have to come in to talk about the signs of hope we see about all this. But the effort that we're following is led by a woman named Carolyn Lukensmeyer, spelled E-H-M-K-E. She calls it a code for a conduct covenant. It's an agreed upon rules system. And what we at the Institute love about the way she's framed it is, and I'm actually going to read it because I can't remember every one, but she has literally identified every arena in which social media is operating on the negative side. She's saying this code of conduct has to deal that we need champions of civility and respect to reduce racism, sexism, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and hate speech. I don't know that you can get any more comprehensive about what we need a code of conduct for.
One of the, picking up on the point around code of conduct, there is a group called the Knight Commission on Media Trust and Democracy that I would encourage folks to check out if you're not familiar with it, because they're taking up a number of questions about the relationship between information, broadly defined, including media and social media, and democracy, and that commission is putting forward a whole bunch of recommendations. I don't think that they're all out yet, but they're engaging in a robust discussion about it, so if you all want to be part of that, I encourage you to check it out. But they actually just put out, my point being, they just put out some research that actually shows that an overwhelming majority, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but majority of Americans actually favor regulation of social media platforms in the same way that we've come to regulate any number of other industries. One example, and it's most likely an outlier in any number of ways. I won't belabor the challenges of social media because it sounds like you all know that pretty well already. The one bright spot that I always turn to when I am thinking that social media gets hopeless is the best TED Talk I've ever seen is by a woman named Megan Phelps Roper. And Megan is the daughter of Fred Phelps, who is the founder of Westboro. And I refuse to call it a church. As a Christian, I refuse to call it a church. But her TED Talk is how she came to leave Westboro, which meant for her leaving her family, which, as hard as my dinner table conversations at Thanksgiving are, I don't know that I can do. Obviously, my family's not, I hope my family's not watching this online. Not equivocating my family in any way, shape, or form. But anyway, I digress. So she talks about how she came to leave Westboro and inherently leave her family behind as a result of an interaction on Twitter, or a series of interactions on Twitter. And it goes back to the point that I was making before, because she said, you know, I knew that I was being hateful. I knew that I was being mean to people. I knew that I was like advancing these ideas, but people started engaging with me around them. Not trying to shame me out of them, not trying to change my mind, but trying to engage with me with a genuine spirit of curiosity. And that inherently, for me, answering their questions about why I believed what I believed, actually invited me to interrogate the things that I was raised to believe and see, did I really believe them? And it was through that interrogation process that I realized that everything I was taught to believe was wrong, and it was fundamentally hypocritical, and led me to decide that I needed to leave the church. That I needed to leave Westboro. No one could have convinced her. No one could have talked her into that. She had to come to that conclusion herself. And the way that she talks about it is super powerful. I'm not doing justice to it right now. But the way that she talks about it is that it was by people engaging with her in a spirit of genuine good intent and curiosity that set her on that journey that has now changed her life. And spoiler alert, she married somebody through that process, and I think they just had a baby. So that's just one in a slew of not positive conversations about Twitter. That's one that gives me hope.
Terrific. We have a couple of questions here from people who say that you politically identify yourself on the left side of the political spectrum, and yet are very concerned about demonizing that you hear among your friends and others with whom you share political perspectives, but you hear them demonizing the right, Trump supporters, and Republicans. And relatedly, there are a couple of challenging questions that are being asked from the audience about what happens on college campuses, particularly on the far left, with claims of racism and whitewashing happening whenever there is one of these inquiry-based approaches to try to engage people, that those challenges are made to quash civil discourse. I wonder if you want to comment on these.
So actually the first question is a very good way for me to get into talk about something that I'd be very remiss if I didn't talk about while I'm with you, which is, despite all of the challenges that we see about our public and political discourse, there really is a good news story out there. And I feel like all of us at the Institute are really privileged to come in contact with it almost on a weekly basis. So back to the point of human beings are very social beings. We actually want to be connected. There is a yearning to be in connection. So what we find in communities all over the country, when we actually are doing our work, when we are bringing tools to a community with elected officials, with journalists, with the public, and in the best of times, all three of them in the same room at the same time, let me suggest write down this website, www.revivecivility.org. Every tool we've created and that we use in communities is up there, downloadable for you to use anytime, any place. But what we find is every place we go, we discover ordinary people who are stepping up, just creating something to combat this disconnection and incivility of their own. Recently, Mickey Edwards, who's on our national board, Mickey and Dan Blickman and I were in Cleveland, Ohio at the City Club. doing a program on incivility and political dysfunction. At the end of the event, a young woman came up to us, and her name, she's Megan Anderson, she's probably about 28 years old, and out of what she saw, her liberal friends demonizing, etc., knowing that wasn't the right thing to have happen in the American community, what they came up with was a very age-appropriate, currently faddish thing. They created something called craft beer and conversation. And every Friday night they go into a different craft beer bar, and they gather people who are on different sides of issues. It might be immigration, it might be the opioid crisis, which is a very big deal in Ohio, and they sit down and create a real civil conversation. In Maine, we discovered a middle-aged man who created something called makeshift coffee houses. And that happens, again, in a coffee house every Friday night. Many of you are the age to remember Henry Wallace, one of FDR's vice presidents, who kind of saved the farm community in the way Francis Perkins saved us with Social Security. The farmstead they owned in Iowa is still owned by that family. It's now their great-grandchildren. And they've been holding public dinners for years, always about sustainable agriculture and slow food. When this whole phenomena about the sort of attack on our judgments of each other began, they shifted those community dinners, now talk about how can we actually listen to one another respectfully. I'm just going to add one fundamental piece that this is about. It's been referred to before. But when you're actually getting people of difference to gather at the same table or the same room, the start place is, how do we listen to one another with one goal only? And that goal is to understand, why did your life experience bring you to the place that you voted for Hillary? And why did my life experience bring me to the place that I voted for Trump? Or that I'm for the wall and you're against, or that whichever issue you choose. This is what we have to get back to, and it's very similar to the Twitter thing you were just describing from that young woman, where the goal is not to change each other's mind. The goal is to walk away from that conversation actually comprehending the why of my interior. When you hear that person say something that you can't take, that you want them to go back, your physiology will give you early warning. You'll start to breathe a little faster. For some of you, you will flush. You'll get red. The moment you feel that physiological clue, there are two things to do to save yourself from yourself. And to get back on track of learning to understand. And the two things are the following. Take a deep breath. Because physiologically, the minute you do that, something shifts. You are not in attack mode, or you're not in a fight mode. You literally, again, are pausing. And the second thing is, ask another question.
My orientation to this, the thing that's getting me through right now is the precept to seek first, to understand and not be understood. Something that I try to keep at the forefront of my mind. I live this a lot, all the time as well. I'm originally from Oklahoma. Mickey Edwards was my congressman growing up. I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I've spent the last 13 years of my life living in the DC area. So in most rooms I'm in, I'm either arguably the most conservative liberal person or the most liberal conservative person, and I don't necessarily identify as either of those. And so this orientation towards asking questions, and I see myself as, in that sense, in having the ability to model the behavior that I hope that others see. So I spend a lot of time telling people why people who think like them are not inherently wrong. So I think that really raises the question of how can we model in our lives the ways that we hope that our friends or our family or our colleagues will ask the questions. And then I would encourage folks, if you're actually looking for specific training and support around this, there's an organization called Better Angels that's doing a lot of work to train the trainer model. So they facilitate conversations across difference, and then they train people to help them facilitate conversations among their friends and the family and communities across difference. So I suggest checking out Better Angels as well.
Great, thank you. So I have this fabulous stack of other questions that we didn't have time for, and I know that our speakers may have wanted to make some final remarks that we don't have time for, but here's what I'd like to propose. We do have built into the agenda a 10-minute break. So if our speakers have a few more minutes to hang by the stage and talk with anybody who'd like to come speak with them, please do so.